You were never slow. You were never broken. But somewhere along the way, you started wondering why your brain works the way it does, why it notices things other people walk straight past, why it cannot stop pulling on threads long after everyone else has moved on. If you have ever felt like your mind is running a program that no one else seems to have, this is the conversation you have been waiting for. Because here is what almost no one talks about. The way your intelligence actually developed had very little to do with what you were born with. It had everything to do with what you survived. There is a hidden pattern. It shows up again and again in the childhoods of people who end up thinking in ways that confuse, unsettle, or quietly intimidate the people around them. And once you see it, once you understand what actually happened inside your brain during those early years, the way you see yourself will never quite be the same. That is what this is about. If your mind works differently than most people around you, this channel was built for you. Hit subscribe so you never miss a video that actually gets it. You probably grew up feeling like you were watching life from slightly outside of it. Not detached, exactly. Just aware. Aware in a way that felt like too much, or not the right kind. You noticed the tension in rooms before anyone said a word. You picked up on what wasn't being said, more than what was. You could read the temperature of a person's mood from a single syllable, from the way they set down a glass. And no one taught you to do that. You just did it. You had to. Other kids seemed to move through the world with a lightness you could observe, but never quite locate in yourself. You were always one step inside your own head, running scenarios, tracing causes, trying to understand why people did what they did. While other children were playing, part of you was analyzing. Not because you chose to, because something in you had decided, very early and very quietly, that understanding was safety. You probably called it overthinking. You probably still do. You have spent a long time wishing your brain had an off switch, wishing you could just exist without processing everything quite so deeply. You have apologized for it, hidden it, or performed a simpler version of yourself just to make conversations easier. But here is what that experience actually was. It was not a malfunction. It was not a personality flaw that you need to correct or soften or apologize for. It was your brain doing something extraordinary, building itself in real time out of the raw material of your life. Every moment of tension you read, every outcome you predicted, every night you spent inside your own mind instead of sleeping, that was your brain constructing something. What it was building is what we need to talk about. The idea that high intelligence is simply handed to you at birth, that it lives inside some fixed, inherited code, is one of the most incomplete stories we tell about human minds. Because the research keeps pointing somewhere else. It keeps pointing to early life, and more specifically, to pressure. Children who grow up in environments that are unpredictable, where moods shift without warning, where the rules change, where nothing is guaranteed, these children face a cognitive demand that most adults never think about. They cannot coast. They cannot switch off. They are required, from a very young age, to become extraordinarily good at reading patterns, at scanning for signals, at thinking 3 moves ahead. This is where the hidden pattern begins. Not in a classroom, not in a gifted program. In the quiet, relentless work of a child trying to make sense of a world that does not quite make sense yet. Neuroscience has shown us, with increasing clarity, that the brain is not a fixed structure. It is a living system that rewires itself in response to experience, a process called neuroplasticity. And what this means is that a childhood spent in a high-demand cognitive environment does not just shape your personality. It physically reshapes your brain. The neural pathways associated with pattern recognition, anticipation, and abstract reasoning become thicker, faster, more automatic, not because of luck, because they were used over and over when they absolutely had to be. Think of it this way. A child who grows up in a predictable, emotionally stable home can afford to be passive. The world delivers itself. But a child who grows up in complexity, emotional, social, or intellectual complexity, cannot afford passivity. That child becomes an observer by necessity, an analyst by survival. And that is exactly what shows up later in life as intelligence. There is something else. Many of the people who develop this kind of deep cognitive ability also experience something that sounds, on the surface, like a disadvantage: early social isolation, or a persistent sense of being different, not belonging in the way others seem to belong, feeling like a foreigner in rooms where everyone else seemed comfortable and fluent. But this inward turn, this enforced solitude, is where abstract thinking blooms. When you are not fully absorbed by social life, your mind goes somewhere else. It builds internal worlds. It asks questions. It plays with ideas the way other children play with toys. Psychologists who study deep cognitive processing have long observed that the trait of introversion, not shyness, but genuine inward orientation, creates the conditions for a kind of thinking that is slow, deep, and highly associative. The kind that connects ideas most people never put in the same room. There is a third piece. Many of these children are handed responsibility early. Not asked. Handed. They are the ones who figure things out, because no one else does. They navigate adult complexity before they have adult tools. They problem solve not because it is an enrichment activity, but because it is necessary. And this early independence of thought, this practice of trusting your own analysis when you have no one else to defer to, becomes the foundation of genuinely original thinking. But here is the part that almost never gets said. These same conditions, the hypervigilance, the inward withdrawal, the early responsibility, they carry a cost. The brain that learned to scan for danger does not easily stop scanning. The mind that learned that understanding was safety does not easily trust that it is ever safe enough to stop understanding. High IQ, in many cases, is not a pure gift. It is an adaptation. And like all adaptations, it solves one problem while quietly creating another. Here is the specific private behavior. You overthink conversations after they end, not just sometimes, consistently. You replay what you said. You reconstruct what they meant. You identify the moment the energy shifted and you run it back, looking for what you missed, what you could have done differently, what the subtext was beneath the words. You do not do this because you are insecure. You do it because you are trained. Your brain learned, very early, that reading a situation incorrectly had consequences. So it kept the system running. It never got the memo that things have changed, that you are not in that house anymore, that you do not need to decode every room you walk into. But underneath the overthinking, if you go deeper, the emotion is not anxiety. Not really. It is loneliness. The specific loneliness of someone who has spent their whole life understanding everyone else and wondering if anyone has ever quite understood them. You are fluent in other people. You can read a room, track the undercurrents, name what is happening in a relationship before the other person has noticed it themselves. But there is a quiet grief in that, because fluency in others does not mean you feel known by them. And the belief you carry, the one you have never quite said out loud, is something like this: if I ever stopped being useful, stopped understanding, stopped anticipating, stopped being the person who holds it all together, I would not be worth staying for. That belief is not the truth. but it is the water you have been swimming in for so long you forgot it was water. Intelligence, when it comes from this place, is not an identity. It is armor that learned to look like a gift. Before we go further, have you ever felt that your ability to understand others comes at the cost of feeling understood yourself? Drop your answer in the comments. You might be surprised how many people feel exactly the same way. Here is a different way to look at the same pattern. Your brain did not develop the way it did because something went wrong. It developed the way it did because something in you refused to give up. A child who scans a room for emotional information is a child who is deeply committed to connection, committed enough to work extraordinarily hard to understand the people around them. A child who turns inward and builds an interior life is a child who found a way to stay curious and alive in conditions that did not always make it easy. A child who takes on early responsibility is a child who decided, before they had the language for it, that showing up matters. That is not damage. That is character forming under pressure. The problem is not the intelligence. The problem is that the intelligence was built inside a context of urgency, and it never learned to operate without that urgency. So it creates it when it is not there. It manufactures complexity to stay useful. It finds problems to solve because solving problems is the only mode it has ever known. Awareness of this is not a small thing. It is not a consolation prize. When you understand the architecture of your own mind, when you see not just what your brain does, but why it learned to do it, something loosens. You stop pathologizing the very features that make you extraordinary. You start to relate to your own intelligence with something closer to compassion than frustration. The one shift worth making is this: practice noticing when you are solving a problem that does not exist yet, not fixing it, not adding a new system, just noticing. You will be mid-conversation, or lying awake, or analyzing an interaction from 3 days ago, and something in you will catch it. There is no emergency here. You are not in danger. You are running a very old program in a situation that does not require it. That moment of recognition, that small pause between the trigger and the spiral, is not nothing. It is the gap where a different kind of thinking can begin. Slower, less armored, more genuinely curious than defensively alert. Before this awareness, you analyze because you must. After it, you begin to have a choice. Not immediately, not always, but more than before. And here is what starts to happen, gradually on the other side of this. Your intelligence does not diminish. It does not soften into something smaller. It actually becomes more accurate, because it is no longer filtering everything through the question of what might go wrong. You start to use your mind, not just to anticipate threat, but to genuinely explore ideas, people, possibilities, with a quality of attention that is open rather than guarded. You stop performing simplicity to make other people comfortable. You stop apologizing for the depth of your thinking. That you start to understand that the very thing you have been managing and minimizing your whole life is, in fact, something worth building a life around. The hypervigilant child who had to read every room becomes the adult who reads rooms with extraordinary precision and chooses, consciously, when that gift serves the moment and when it can rest. That is not just psychological growth, that is freedom. And it begins, not with a dramatic change, but with one honest recognition. My mind became this for a reason. And I am no longer in that reason. I get to decide what I do with it now. We started with a question about intelligence, where it comes from, why some minds move through the world differently. And the answer, it turns out, is not about IQ scores or genetic lottery or some rare combination of neurons you either have or you do not. The answer is about a child who needed to understand the world more urgently than the world was willing to explain itself, who turned that need into a skill, who built something extraordinary out of something difficult. You were not born exceptional and then had experiences. You had experiences that made you exceptional. There is a profound difference between those two things. And that difference matters because it means your intelligence is not accidental. It is earned. It is yours in the deepest possible sense. The invitation now is not to leave the past behind. It is to stop letting the past set the terms for what the future gets to be. The mind you built in survival, bring it with you. But let it operate in the open air for once. Not because there is danger, because there is not. Your intelligence was never just a gift. Why, it was always a message from a younger version of you to a future version of you that said, I found a way through. I made something from nothing. I am still here. And you are. If this felt like something someone in your life needed to hear, send it to them. No explanation needed. Sometimes a video says what we cannot. And if you want to go even deeper into how early emotional environments shape your thinking patterns as an adult, the next video is already waiting for you.